I'm out in my greenhouse and it is February, the middle of February, and it's time to start planting some seeds out here in this greenhouse. And I want to show you what I'm going to be planting. And a lot of this is based off of my experience and what I have done before. And I know people are going to wonder, because it's probably the most common question that I get when people come into my greenhouse or look into my greenhouse, other than maybe judging because it's messy and unorganized, is, what's this? This is a bottle of water, and it is used as a weight, if you look at there, to hold down the skylights or the vents, so it keeps them from blowing away when the wind gets crazy. That was something that we did based off of recommendations from people who have built this greenhouse and use this greenhouse, and it works. It works very well. So if you build a Harbor Freight greenhouse, do this on your vents. Preferably not to where it's going to constantly hit you in the head. I do need to raise these up a little bit because I'm being a rather tall person. I'm constantly hitting these with my head, and it's not super fun. All right, being February, it's definitely time to start some seeds if you want to. All of these seeds you can direct sow. I am not going to direct sow this year because I'm still working on my beds and still getting them ready. Also, I've mentioned before that things are changing a little bit for us, and I don't know exactly how or when any of that's going to play out, or if it actually even will change dramatically. I don't know. So that kind of is going into my decisions this year because I don't really know what I'm doing. So a lot of things, because normally what I do is I have a plan and I have my gardens sketched out just so of like where I want things, what I want to grow. And then that way I know what I want to start and how many I want to start. And I don't know exactly what that looks like right now. And that's okay. So I'm just going to start anyways because I want to start seeds and I don't want to be without stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start things that I know we can eat and transplant and are easy to grow, things like that. I'm not going to experiment too much with different varieties of things this year because it's not going to be very useful right now. So in February, it's a good time to go ahead and start your cool season crops. Based off of experience for myself, I get very excited as soon as February hits. And then the past 2 years, I have planted things and put them in my greenhouse. And then it snowed last year, and this year it iced over. I've planted lettuce seeds, and some of them kind of germinated, and it looks like they died off, but it looks like some of the seeds didn't even start at all. So, see that? So I'm going to leave them in here and water them and take care of them and see if they germinate. They can. So let's just see. I did a lot of work there, and let's just see if it grows. Also, February is a very good time if you want sweet potatoes or can grow sweet potatoes to start sweet potato slips. I have 2 sweet potatoes in jars in the house with water in them with the pointy end down to grow slips up and out of that. I did that last year. That's how I got all my sweet potato slips because I think sweet potato slips are very expensive. And I started them in February and planted them out in June or the end of May, one or the other, and grew all the sweet potatoes that we ate for this year. So some of these potatoes here, this is a different way to start sweet potato slips. I have not done this before. I have a few funky shaped sweet potatoes in here and some smaller ones And so this is peat moss because I have peat moss here. And I'm going to wet this down really good, keep the soil moist but not saturated, and then slips should grow up from here as well. So this is new. I'm experimenting here. My plan would be to grow twice the amount of sweet potatoes that I grew last year. So that way we can continue to use our sweet potatoes to grow slips. I am going to go buy a bag of organic sweet potatoes and start slips with those because that's what I did last year and it worked very well. But it is a long process. It's relatively inexpensive to do. You just need to stay up on it, and you need to start it several months before you plan on planting sweet potatoes into your yard. I also found out that herbs can take a long time to get started and going. Herbs are also really good at keeping in containers if you want. So if you don't have a lot of space, herbs do very well in containers. So I'm also going to be starting herbs this week. Things like basil. We eat a lot of basil. I would like to eat more chives because I like the flavor of them. I just don't grow them a lot. And so I want to do more chives. We do parsley all the time, cilantro, oregano, things like that. If you don't want to get seeds, or you can't get seeds, but you buy some herbs from the store or from a farmer from a farmer's market or whatever, take off the last few little leaves, stick it in some water. The herbs will root in the water, and then you can plant it. That's another way to start herbs if you don't have seeds, and that's actually a quicker way to get herbs growing in your garden. And like I said, herbs are great in pots, so do that one. I'm going to do that with some of my oregano that I have in my yard, and my lavender and my rosemary, because all of those things, my rosemary and my lavender I bought as starts, but I'm going to root those in some water. You just need water, change it out, periodically, so that way it's fresh water and not icky, nasty water. And then, so I can have more lavender and more rosemary, and then oregano, because all of those things took a long time to grow. Basil takes a long time to get started, but once it gets started, it gets big. And the cool thing about herbs is the more you cut, the more they grow. So don't be afraid to cut them and use them, or cut them and root them so you can repot them into different pots, or give them away. Another thing I noticed that takes a while to get started and get going are flowers, like annual flowers. So I'm going to be planting those this time of year also into my seed cell trays, this is what these are. So you can fit a lot there. So once it gets started and it's got its first true leaves on it, I'm gonna teach you all some really fun words here. You can sound really smart. When it has 2 little leaves on it, that's called the Cotyledon Stage. And that's not considered their true leaf stage. When they get a little bit bigger, you'll start seeing other leaves grow, and those leaves look different for most of the vegetables and flowers and things like that you're going to be growing. So when it gets to that true leaf stage is when I can repot these into something bigger. The reason I like doing this and putting it in this first is because sometimes seeds don't germinate, and so this makes less soil that I'm using, and then the stuff that actually does germinate, which the majority of them do, but sometimes they just don't, and that's okay. That happens. The seeds, the plants then can be potted into something bigger, so that way it has more room and more soil for nutrition and things like that. So also starting leafy greens this time of year is really good. So any of your lettuces is really good. Kale, Swiss chard. Swiss chard takes a little while to get going, but in a lot of places it can be a biennial, something like that, meaning that it's not necessarily perennial, but it can come back year after year. If you've ever dug up the roots of Swiss chard, they can get huge, absolutely huge. In this area, I have read of people keeping Swiss chard around for 9 years, the same plant. I usually don't keep it going year after year because I end up changing where I want to put Swiss chard. But that's one of those that's super prolific and can get you going. Like, you can plant it early, get it going, and you can have it through most of the summer and all the way into fall and most through all of winter. You might want to cover it with a heavy frost. It's just one of those that's just really good. It's pretty. It does great. And then other things would be mustard, bok choy, any of those choys, tatsoi, like those Asian greens. Those are really, really good to start this time of year. Radishes. I would like to say cabbages, but I have not been very successful at cabbages. Most of my cabbages I buy from the grocery store, or I get them at the farmers markets. The ones that I use to make my sauerkraut with are coming from farmers that I know do not spray anything on their cabbages. Also, kohlrabi is really good to start this time of year. If you look it up, some of these things are going to have various dates of starting. The general rule of thumb is look up your last frost date. We're in zone 7 outside of Memphis. I don't know exactly when my last frost date is. People say like April 15th. I've actually gotten really good in the past 3 years of predicting it, even when the closer it gets to that time. I have held off on planting things in the ground because I'm like, we're about to get a really bad frost and I don't know why, but we're going to, and whatever. And then sometimes like the frost date's off, but it's just a general guideline. So go by that. Go by the general guideline. To start seeds, you do not have to have a greenhouse. You just need a sunny window. I don't have that, so I have a greenhouse because my husband wanted us to have a greenhouse so we could start early. All of these seeds for years. Let's see, we've been in our house almost 7 years now. I've had the greenhouse. This would be my 3rd season starting in the greenhouse because we got it right before I was diagnosed with cancer. So yeah, 3rd season. All those seasons before, I direct sowed my seeds into the ground, and you can do that too. But this video is mostly for those that want to start your seeds. And what can you start now in February? Because I think February is one of those months where you kind of get itchy and you're like, I want to do something, but I don't want to do something. And it's a good time to get out here and start them. Other things that I'm going to start now are tomatoes and peppers. And yes, those are hot season crops and very, very much summer things. What I learned is that peppers take a long time to grow. They take a long time to flower, and they take a long time to produce peppers. But once that heat of the summer starts, man, they're like producing peppers. Anytime I've started peppers and I've direct sowed them, I have not gotten any peppers until the very end of the season. And so that's defeating because you're like, oh, I just can't grow peppers, or peppers don't grow well here, or blah, 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 whatever. Well, if you start your pepper seeds in February and get them nice and big, like, because they'll get pretty big. Like the ones that I grew got about this big, like a foot big, and they were nice and leafy and whatnot, and I'd have flower here and there but as soon as that heat just ramped up, and that here the humidity is like oppressive, so as soon as all of that hit, flowers started bursting and peppers started growing like crazy, and I had peppers for days, to the point where I was done with peppers. I'm like, I've dried all the peppers I want. I've used all the peppers I want. I don't want any more peppers. So peppers, definitely start them in February. The cool thing about peppers is if you don't have a yard, peppers grow well in pots. So you can also grow peppers in pots. Tomatoes, like peppers, generally can be started early. I like to start them early because for the same reason, I like to be able to get them in the ground right after the first frost and let them get going, because they put on a lot of growth, and then they produce the flowers, which produces the fruit. And once they start, it's just constant for most varieties of tomatoes. There's other people that are way smarter than me when it comes to varieties of tomatoes. Go listen to them. Don't listen to me on tomatoes. But I want to start my tomatoes this year. And that's what I'm going, or this time of year. So that way I can have tomatoes going. Tomatoes, all before I had a greenhouse, I started in the ground. And you can direct sow your tomatoes too, just fine. Just know that when you start seeing them at the farmers markets, or some of your friends who bought plant starts start getting tomatoes, you're going to be just a few weeks behind. But they're not. Tomatoes aren't like peppers, and that it just takes that much longer. But it is really good to go ahead and start tomatoes now, because that's been tomatoes, right? Also, another thing that grows well, and I don't know exactly when the best time to start it would be, but you could probably start it in February also, is zucchini and your summer squash. It takes a little bit to get going, but they get going and they do very well. Okay, I'm going to stop here and I'm going to collect my thoughts, because I really have something to share with you on zucchini. When I worked farmers markets with, when I worked farmers markets selling my microgreens, I'm a very observant person. I like to watch things, and I take in a lot of things that I watch. And I looked around and I saw all these farmers who were super successful having zucchinis, and they had them coming out their ears, and I did not at all. I couldn't grow zucchinis, and I'm like, this kind of stinks that I can't grow zucchinis. So I watched and I listened, and what they do is they start their seeds very early, and they get those zucchinis in the ground as soon as possible. So that way they are growing and producing zucchinis very early. In this area, in Zone 7, outside of Memphis, hot, humid, we get pest pressure. Zucchinis could almost be considered a cool season crop, meaning that it produces very well up until it gets really, really hot. Once it gets hot here, you have your squash bugs, you have all those pests that are starting to come out, and they will wreak havoc on your squash. So you know what the farmers do? Is they rip them out of the ground and start seeds again. And then they plant them as soon as that pest pressure starts to wane. And then there's zucchinis in the late summer, early fall around here, and that's what they do. So that's what I did last year, and guess what? It worked. It worked. It was awesome. So zucchinis, not super great for hot summer, but they're super great for early summer, mostly spring, early summer, late fall, late summer, early fall. So that's pretty much what I'm going to get planted this month. I won't do it all in one day because that's a lot. I only have a few hours to do some of these things, and I need to wash all of my trays because all my trays are very dirty, and I want to make sure that I'm not introducing disease or funguses or anything else that I could be into my garden this year. Alright, thanks for watching, guys. Go get planting something. Tomatoes, peppers, herbs, leafy greens, flowers. Plant more flowers in your garden. I promise it brings beauty, and you'll enjoy it more than you think you will.